Today's episode is brought to you by Grata. Grata is the leading platform for private market deal making. With its innovative AI workflows and investment-grade data, Grata helps strategic acquirers effortlessly find, research, and engage with potential targets, all through a sleek, modern interface. Grata makes it easy to value deals intelligently and size private companies from the outside in. I love it. We use it for our pipeline development. Whether you're looking to find your next acquisition target or researching comps in your market, Grata provides all the data and automation you need to edge out the competition. Discover more, win more with Grata. Visit grata.com to learn more. That's grata.com. Feeling buried under due diligence documents? Exhausted from spending countless hours reviewing and double-clicking? Worried something might slip through the cracks? Imagine automating your document review process, saving time and costs. Dealroom just launched Dealroom AI, designed specifically for M&A professionals. It's like having an extra pair of eyes that never tire or miss details. Automate document analysis and focus on what really matters. No more late nights, no more missed details, just faster, smarter due diligence. Want to learn more? Head to dealroom.net and see how Dealroom AI can cut review time by up to 80%. That's dealroom.net. Because in M&A, every detail matters. Let Dealroom help you nail it every time. Hello, M&A scientists. Welcome to the M&A Science Podcast, where we learn from the best in M&A to uncover proven techniques for enterprise value creation. If you're interested in learning more about practices to improve your M&A approach, or want to get involved with a community of forward-thinking M&A practitioners, visit mascience.com. You can get started by subscribing to our free weekly newsletter for the latest insight and events, and that's mascience.com. Otherwise, head over to LinkedIn and catch up with us on the go by following M&A Science. I'm your host, Kison Patel, CEO and founder of M&A Science. Joining me today is Chuck Webb, lead antitrust counsel at FedEx. FedEx is an American multinational company focused on transportation, e-commerce, and business services based in Memphis, Tennessee, traded on NYSE under FDX. Today, we're going to talk about managing regulatory compliance risks in M&A. Chuck, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kison. Thank you for having me today.
Hey, Charles, before we get in the conversation, I know we're going to touch on legalese related topics. Can we put a little disclaimer just so folks at home don't take this as any kind of legal advice, investment advice, anything they do dangerous? I don't know.
Yeah, no, certainly. I'm not giving legal advice here. And I should say that my statements, my talk today, my statements that these views are my own views, not the view of any client that I currently or formerly have represented.
Thanks for taking a break from working on deals to have this conversation. Can we kick things off a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, you say I'm currently lead counsel responsible for antitrust for FedEx. In terms of background, I'm originally from Boston, still a four-sport Boston fan, so very happy about the Celtics' recent championship. Got my education largely in Washington, D.C. First, my undergraduate degree at American University, law school at George Washington University. I got my law degree in 1998. Spent the first 6 years of my career in kind of big firm D.C. in the antitrust practice groups, first with Sherman and Sterling, and then with Howell, Reese, Simon, Arnold, and White. And then 2005, kind of took an interesting career move. I moved my family and myself to Jersey. And I'm not talking about, this is not the Bruce Springsteen, John Bon Jovi version of Jersey. This is actually the island of Jersey, and technically the bailiwick of Jersey, the offshore banking jurisdiction, Jersey, in the Channel Islands, where I was first the legal advisor and then executive director for an organization called the Jersey Competition Regulatory Authority, which is the island of Jersey's competition law enforcer and also telecoms and postal regulator. And the reason I moved out there was I helped implement the jurisdiction's first competition law, which came into effect in 2005. And under that, we did the first enforcement actions, the first merger reviews. So that's kind of my government experience. Moved back to the States in 2010, rejoined my old law firm, Howry, as a partner in late 2010. Unfortunately, the firm collapsed soon after that. Not for my joining. It just was a tough time in the economy. And then went with a majority of my practice group to Baker Botts, where I was for about 3 years as a partner in the antitrust practice group. And then end of 2013, switched to in-house, first at Walmart, where I was for almost 5 years, most of that based in Bentonville, Arkansas. But actually 20 months of that back over in the UK, where I was the chief ethics and compliance officer for ASDA, which was at that time Walmart's UK subsidiary. And then finally switched over to FedEx September 2018, where I currently am now. My current job responsibilities is I basically have global responsibility for antitrust or competition law compliance for FedEx globally. And I also support, as you referenced, I support our M&A teams, both in terms of antitrust or competition law aspects of M&A, and also coordinating compliance due diligence across my team, which is the Corporate Integrity and Compliance Group, which sits within legal. Just to finish, I also taught for 3 years as an adjunct professor, taught antitrust law at the University of Memphis Law School in Memphis. So been doing this for a while, the antitrust gig, and I think I've seen it now as a law firm partner, as a government enforcer, as a in-house counsel, and a little bit in academia. So I've kind of seen it from all sides, and absolutely love the subject matter.
I was just going to say, you've seen it from all different angles. And this is great. I wanted an expert on antitrust, and I got one. Really excited this conversation. Can we kick things off, or can we get into?
I would say I talk about. I'm really deep on antitrust, history, and baseball. Other than that, I'm basically useless. So very happy to talk to you about that.
I got a similar thing, not exactly those areas, but what are the different? Let's just kind of give a high level. Like, what are the different types of regulatory compliance risks when it comes into M&A?
Sure. Let me, and let's keep it at a high level for now, because I think we're going to delve in these topics in a bit more detail as we go forward. But let me kind of put regulatory compliance risk in kind of 3 buckets, if you will. Substantive risk, procedural risk, and other. Kind of 3 distinct buckets, but as we'll talk about, they're all related. So first, the substantive risk. And I've had in my career, let's say you have the boardroom of company A, and it wants to acquire company B. And either the firm's general counsel or the board of directors, they come to an antitrust counsel and they say, is this deal even possible? Can we even do this with respect to the regulatory risks it may arise? So in answering that question, an antitrust lawyer is going to look at kind of, well, what are the substantive antitrust issues arising from the transaction? Kind of first and foremost, are there any horizontal issues relating to the transaction? Are company A and company B, are they actual competitors in a current market now, or are they potential competitors? Do they take customers? Do they take business from each other? That's kind of, and if so, how concentrated is the market? How many other competitors are there, et cetera? So that's kind of, horizontal. Are they direct competitors? If not, another question you'll want to ask is, well, are there any potential vertical issues? So for instance, if you're not, let's say company B is not a competitor of company A, but what if it's a key distributor, or what if it's a key supplier? And if acquiring that key distributor or key supplier and bringing it in-house to company A, is that going to have a danger of forcing or foreclosing or freezing out or discriminating against company A's competitors? If they can't get that distributor, they can't get that supplier. So horizontal risks, vertical risks, and there's other potential risks as well. You're ultimately in merger review, or the regulatory merger side, the ultimate substantive question is, will the combination of company A and company B put the combined company in, let's say, a monopoly or dominant position in a market where it can increase prices, Or will the combination of company A and company B facilitate collusion or coordination among the remaining competitors in the market? So that's kind of the ultimate substantive antitrust risk. Oh, and I should mention also, primarily and traditionally, you're looking at the substantive risk in what we call downstream markets, where company A and company B sell their products or sell their services. But increasingly in antitrust, you also need to consider the competitive effects of the merger in upstream markets, where company A and company B are purchasing their goods or services. They need to sell their products, particularly in the United States with respect to the merger's potential effect on labor markets. That's something I'll talk about. I will talk about today. So that's the substantive bucket. And then you have the closely related procedural bucket. So where in the world does the combination of company A and company B, where does that require regulatory clearance, or particularly a regulatory filing, and then waiting for the agencies to review the transaction? So for instance, in the United States, we have a statute called the Hart-Scott-Rodino, or HSR Act. And that's a statute that requires, for transactions and merging parties reaching certain financial thresholds, it requires the parties to file their merger via an HSR form with the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, the two federal agencies designated to enforce the antitrust laws in the United States. So it requires you to file the forms and then wait a certain number of statutory days, allocated days, what's called waiting periods, to allow the agencies to review the deal. And you cannot close the deal until the agencies finish that review process. And the agencies either say, okay, we have no further questions, they let the time periods run out, or you reach some sort of agreement with the agencies. And so the HSR framework is what governs that in the United States. But there is antitrust laws enforced in well over 100 countries worldwide. Many of them have their own merger filing regimes with similar filing and waiting period requirements. So you have the European merger control regime in the Brussels, the DG Comp European Union level, that if you have if your merger has a community or union dimension, you may have to file in Brussels. And again, file, have the waiting periods before you can close. And if you don't satisfy the Brussels thresholds, there could be filing obligations at member state level, say with the Bundeskartellamt in Germany, the French Competition Agency, Spanish Competition Agency, et cetera. Then there's also filing regimes in Canada, Australia, Brazil, India, South Africa. Just again, depending on where the companies do business, China, you may have filing obligations. So, in those filing obligations, it's very much tied to the substantive risk, and it'll drive the deal's timing of when you can expect to close. So, substantive risk, procedural risk, and then there's kind of other risks. And I'm going to put three subcategories in here. First is gun jumping. This is something we'll talk about today. So gun jumping is the parties, company A and company B, they cannot effectively close their transaction. So company A cannot effectively take control of company B prior to closing and prior to getting regulatory clearance in the jurisdictions where it's required. And if they do take premature control, they can face substantial fines for that. Also, it prohibits company A and company B from sharing commercially sensitive information prior to closing, which could reduce competition in either the pre-merger period or if the deal falls apart, reduce competition going forward. So there's gun jumping risks. You'll need to do compliance due diligence, including antitrust due diligence. So let's say company A will need to kick the tires of company B to see, okay, what am I actually buying? Is company B involved in a cartel? What am I stepping into here? Because if it's a full merger, you're likely going to have inherent the liabilities of the company you acquire, especially for share acquisition. And finally, the last thing I'll say, Kison, is you're going to need to then plan for integration. How are you going to integrate, in my example, how is company A going to integrate company B into its corporate compliance program, including its antitrust compliance program. Now, again, because of the gun jumping risks, you can't integrate prior to closing, but you will need, especially as you get closer to closing, you will need to have a written plan to say, okay, day one, this is going to happen in compliance. 6 months out, we want this happened. By a year out, we want that happened, and you'll need to have that plan, usually as part of the overall integration plan for the company. But you'll need to have a specific plan for compliance, including antitrust compliance. So I'd say, as long as you got those three buckets sorted out, you are fine.
So let me make sure I got this right, Chuck. We got substantive risks that would include two big buckets: direct competition, which would be framed as horizontal, and like key suppliers, which is more vertical. But this is for the core that, hey, you have some competitive risks here. And then you have procedural risks. And this is more around the regulatory filings that you would need to complete. In the US, HSR is a big one. But then wherever this business is doing business, you need to be aware that there's going to be other bodies with local governments that may have bodies of anti-competitiveness that you have to follow their rules. And then the other category, we have gun jumping, compliance with due diligence, or compliance due diligence, actually doing diligence on how they're keeping up with compliance. And then the third is integration of compliance. How are you actually going to integrate this company and the compliance program into yours?
Yep, exactly.
Can we walk through an example of a deal? And a couple of questions that pop into mind. One is it all companies of all shapes and sizes that need to sort of be aware and follow through? Or is it just public companies? And then maybe we could just make up an example and what does the timeline look like of when you start reporting to DOJ and FTC?
Sure. Well, to example, is it all companies or is public companies? The framework that I just described is potentially applicable to all companies, whether public or private. So being public or private, the rules for at least for antitrust don't change with respect to acquisitions. Now, your risk profile will change depending on the nature of your company. Now, let's say if you're just doing business, if the target company is just doing business in the United States, you probably don't need to worry about foreign filings. And as part of, let's say, a FedEx M&A, when something is first brought to my attention, one of the first questions I ask is okay, are they just U.S.? Are they selling outside the United States? Because that really can kind of start to frame frame the analysis, where you only and then how big is the transaction? I mean, the HSR filing fee, it's the key threshold there is the size of the transaction, which currently I think the filing threshold for HSR it's about 119 million. So give or take. So it's indexed for inflation each year. So if your deal is below that, you don't have HSR obligations. If it's above that, you do. But if you don't have HSR obligations, you don't have the filing obligations, but you still have potentially gun jumping risks. You still have your compliance due diligence. You still need to factor in integration. In terms of planning, it really depends on the nature of the deal. So if it's a major international deal that's going to present, again, substantive antitrust risks, especially horizontal risks in multiple jurisdictions, you'll need to file in United States, Canada, Europe, Brazil, China, and you're expecting kind of a lot of these agencies, Europe, for example, United States, for example, they have in that kind of regulatory framework, they'll have what's called like a phase one or phase two process, where through the phase one, like in the United States, the agencies have 30 days to conduct their initial investigation. If after 30 days they want to go on to a second stage in the United States, they'll issue what's called a second request, which is a big document production. Europe has a similar procedure. China has a similar procedure. So back to your question, if it's a major international deal with multiple filings in multiple jurisdictions, you'll want to go to the agencies up front on that one. I would say, well, in Europe, you're required to go into the agency prior even to filing what's called a Form CO there, which is the European filing. I would also recommend going in and talking to the FTC or DOJ even before the transaction hits the newspapers. I mean, if it's a major international deal, you don't want the agencies finding out about that in the Wall Street Journal. You want to go in there, and you want to go in there proactively to start saying, here is why this deal does not raise competitive concerns. Oh, and here's why it's even pro-competitive. You'll want to get in front of that narrative, and you want to construct that narrative. You don't want that narrative constructed for you. But you'll need to take it all into account in terms of timing. Again, for a major international deal where you're expecting, let's say, a second request in the United States, you're expecting a second phase of the investigation in Europe, you're probably going to want to have you will want to have a long time between signing the deal and your expected closing. And that's going to have impacts on the corporate documents, when your target closing date. I would say you would at least have a 12-month period if you're expecting a major international review. It can even be longer for significant deals, let's say in China, where the reviews tend to take a little longer. On the other hand, if the mergers are constrained in the United States, there's not a lot of foreign income or foreign sales. You only have an HSR filing. Your review can take roughly a month, and you can have kind of a month between filing and closing, and you can plan accordingly. So those are kind of two hypothetical examples. I hope that's helpful.
It sounds like a bigger deal. You're going to need to really get ahead of it and probably give just a heads up to the regulatory bodies beforehand. And if it's not as big of a deal, you may just go straight forward through the process.
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, again, I think if it's a bigger deal where you're expecting kind of challenge, high profile deal, you're going to want to get that narrative to the agencies beforehand. And you're going to want to, go in beforehand saying, look, this is coming down the pipe. This is why the deal does not harm competition. Frankly, you'll want to say this is why the deal is good for competition. Whereas if it's a smaller deal, you may just, you don't need to do that. You'll probably just file where you need to file and see if the phone rings, see if the agencies pick it up and have any concerns. And it really is. But that ties back to kind of that substantive analysis, as I was saying before. Again, are there a lot of horizontal overlaps here? Are the parties competitors? Are there other? So that substantive analysis will drive that strategy. Again, for a higher profile deal, raising some substantive concerns, you'll want to get control of that narrative, very, very early in the process, and bring that narrative to the agencies. Where if there are no substantive concerns, or the substantive concerns aren't that great, you may just say, you'll file and you'll reply to any agency questions you get, but you're not going to take that proactive approach.
Got it. And the main filing is HSR. You make this filing. Basically, no news is good news.
Well, yeah. I mean, to get in the weeds, yes, in general. Now, you can get in the weeds a little bit, Kison. So there's something in the United States called early termination, where if you file, you can request early termination. The agencies under the statute, either the FTC or DOJ, and again, they split jurisdiction over who reviews what. They can take 30 days to review the deal. If you can request early termination, which they can generally clearance on that. And so your phone will ring and to say you have received early termination. And that generally is within 15 days within the waiting period. So that news can be slightly good news. Although under the Biden administration, kind of the examples of they had suspended early termination for a bit. And I think it's getting rarer and rarer that you get that. But then other jurisdictions like Europe or some of the European member states, the agency actually needs to close the investigation, and for you to receive clearance. In the U.S., if you don't get early termination, the waiting periods just expire, and you can then close. So yes, in that instance, no news is good news, but you'll generally get some sort of, either early termination, or outside the United States, you'll get like a closing statement from the agencies, and then you can go ahead or closing statement of the investigation, then you can consummate the acquisition.
How does this affect the timeline of a deal in general? Like if I did a sub $100 million deal, didn't need to do anything with HSR filing at all, versus if I did have to do HSR filing, and what I'm particularly curious about is this period between sign and close. Is that mainly an area specifically for the timeline to not get a response on HSR filing, or is this filing done earlier, like as soon as we sign an LOI?
Oh, that's a great question. So in the United States, you can file in the United States and also other jurisdictions. You can file your HSR form, or outside the United States, you can file on an LOI or an MOU. You do not need, and it just and that preliminary agreement just needs to show the good faith intent of the parties to go forward with the transaction, but does not need to be it certainly does not need to be the final agreement. And does not, and it can also be non-binding. So long as it shows a good faith intention to go forward with the transaction. So yeah, you can file on a preliminary agreement, like a letter of intent, memorandum of understanding, and then as you're developing your definitive agreement, whether it be a stock purchase agreement, asset purchase agreement, joint venture, whatever. Now, of course, as again, depending on the regulatory risk profile, let's say you're above HSR and you're expecting, based on substantive risk profile, you're expecting agency questions on a horizontal issue or a vertical issue. Again, you may want to, or you will want to put that into your timing of, okay, we're not going to be able to close this within 2 months because we're expecting a second request in the United States or expecting a phase 2 investigation in Europe. So again, you may want to put that closing date out 6 months, maybe even a year. And of course, there'll be other factors beyond antitrust driving your period between signing and closing. For instance, you need to satisfy conditions precedents. You need to give notice to, as required by third-party contracts, to suppliers, to change of control notices, et cetera. So antitrust is not the only consideration, but it is, in my experience, it is one of the driving factors of your expected timeline. And guys, the longer the period between signing and closing, the greater, what I talked about earlier, the gun jumping risks, the greater the more focus you will need to have on those gun jumping risks in terms of, okay, we cannot take premature control of the target prior to closing. We need to be careful about our information flows. We need to have a structure of how we're going to structure the information flows during due diligence and during integration planning. And the longer that time frame is between signing and closing, probably the more focus you'll need to have on that.
What's the HSR form itself look like? Like, what kind of fields are in there? Is it like a big essay form, or is it a bunch of checkboxes?
Well, that's an interesting question that you raise, because as of right now, as we speak right now in late July 2024, I don't have the date in front of me. It is a relatively simple form. It is you need to give by, I believe it's North American Industry Code. And I have to say, I have to disclosure. It's actually been quite some time since I've actually filled out an HSR form. But from my recollection, you need to give revenue figures of you and the target by, I believe it's North American Industry Code. You need to give kind of corporate information. The probably most interesting thing is you'll need to give what's called 4C and 4D documents. The 4C documents are documents created by or for the board of directors, which talks about the deal's potential effects on markets, competition, market concentration, et cetera. Those documents often are the most interesting part of an HSR form. You need to give information about prior transactions, et cetera. Now that's the requirements today. Now, about a year ago, the FTC and DOJ issued a consultation, a request for comment, that they were going to expand the HSR form dramatically. They were going to require kind of narratives about the deal's impacts on competition. They were going to require a lot of information on potentially overlapping directors between the merging companies. A lot more kind of documents in terms of deal docs brought to the deal team. It would make the HSR form a lot closer to what's called a Form CO in Europe, which is the merger filing in Europe, which requires much more narrative explanations of kind of how do we define the relevant markets, what are the concentration levels in the markets, et cetera. More kind of that substantive story of the transaction. Currently, that's not required in the United States. It is required in Europe. It is required in places like India or South Africa or Brazil. The U.S. may be moving towards that, but the FTC and DOJ have not come out with their final rulemaking. They received, I believe, multiple, I think over, a few thousand comments during the consultation period on the revised form, and they have not come out with the final form yet. So right now, things are relatively simple in the United States, but we'll have to see if the agencies move more towards a more extensive filing under Hart-Scott.
Can you teach me how to land the narrative?
Oh, you mean of a deal of a merger?
Just to kind of put to rest attention around and get our story right, just so we can flow through approval.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that just takes from an antitrust lawyer's perspective. Antitrust is a very factual, specific jurisprudence profession. I mean, if you read the antitrust laws, I'll just stick with the United States, just to make it simple. I mean, the primary statute that the agencies are enforcing is Section 7 of the Clayton Act, which was passed in the early 20th century, which it fills not even one page. Basically says, mergers that substantially lessen competition in any line of commerce in the United States are prohibited. And that's I'm paraphrasing there, but basically the key is merger that substantially lessen competition in any line of commerce. So that's rather a simple test, but where antitrust gets complicated is actually applying that to the businesses of the merging parties. So there is no substitute. So when I have a merger, again, that substantive question of is this deal even possible? I'm going to want to talk to the business people, kind of the vice presidents, the managing directors of kind of the business lines of that maybe company A and company B have competing products. So, okay, are we the next best substitutes? How closely do we compete? Do we compete on price? Do we compete on service? Do we compete on other factors? What's the rate of innovation in these markets? Have we seen a lot of new competitors entering? Have we seen a lot of competitors exiting? What is the concentration? What would be our post-merger market share? What are the market shares of the other companies? Are companies capacity constrained? How much excess capacity is there? Are there foreign competitors that could come in? There's 1,000 questions you'll want to ask to get to the details of the transaction. Once you get, and then I would say that's even pre-narrative, to understand the facts. Once you understand the facts, then you can go to, okay, how is this merger? Why is this merger not going to harm competition? In that it's not going to put the combined company, in a position to increase prices after the merger, either on its own or in coordination with the other competitors. And in fact, you're going to want to have a thing. This act merger is actually good for competition because it's going to increase the speed of innovation. Let's say company A and company B are both have products in the pipeline that are good for consumers. Combining and get together will actually bring those products to market quicker or faster than they otherwise would. Or the combination of goods and services of company A combined with company B will be a better package for your customers. And that's the key thing. You want to show this in terms of downstream markets. This is in the customer's interest. So that narrative. So that's how you kind of create that narrative. You got to have a detailed understanding of the facts first, to then go on and say, okay, this merger will not harm competition, and in fact, it's actually good for competition and good for consumers. And you want that message consistent to the agencies. You want it consistent to customers. You want it consistent to your vendors, and you want it consistent to your employees, because you want that consistent message. And I think a pitfall is you tell one constituency one thing, and another constituency another thing, and it conflicts. And you darn well sure better be consistent with, let's say, what you're telling DG Comp in Europe and the Department of Justice in the United States, because guess what? they're talking as well, and they're talking about, what are you hearing from the merging parties? They may be sharing information, so you got to have a consistent approach, and that consistent approach among the agencies and among customers, suppliers, employees, etc.
Hey, can we do like a little history on some of these anti-competitive laws? Because it goes back like well over 100 years.
Oh, sure. Oh,
It's
sure.
I just know the Sherman Act and then there's Clayton Act, but I don't know. You know this stuff better than I do. If you want to maybe tap into a high level of like why we have these laws to begin with.
Well, sure. Well, yeah, the Sherman Act in the United States goes back. It was enacted by Senator John Sherman, was the leading sponsor, Republican from Ohio, who, by the way, is the younger brother of General Tecumseh Sherman from the Civil War. It was enacted in 1890 in the kind of the midst of the Gilded Age, and by the way, kind of like American football, antitrust in North America actually kind of like football. It's actually Canadian first because Canada implemented their first competition law in 1889, the year before the Sherman Act. Kind of like Canadians played American football before we did. Kind of similar there, but no, in the United States it was enacted. So the Sherman Act was enacted 1890, right in the middle of the Gilded Age, when there was and it's called antitrust because back then I think it was corporate law. You couldn't have corporations spanning multiple states, I believe. So there was a lot of concern about these trusts. It basically mergers, like John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil is an early example of kind of bringing in under common ownership, railways, oil production, mines, and kind of bring that in kind of common ownership. And it was interesting at the time too, because at the time it was both kind of a concern of economic power and companies having monopolies and being able to increase prices or decrease innovation to the detriment of their customers. But also there very much also was a fear of political power, that economic power would become political power and really kind of take our democracy away. Fast forward 1972. The late, great Justice Thurgood Marshall said that the antitrust laws are the, quote, Magna Carta of free enterprise, and they are as important to protect our economic liberties as let's say the Bill of Rights is to protect our civil liberties. And that was Justice Marshall said that in the late 70s. So that was the origin of antitrust law in the United States. Fast forward 1914, you have the Federal Trade Commission Act, the creation of the Federal Trade Commission, which that's Sherman Act outlaws certain, outlaws cartels and monopolies. The Federal Trade Commission Act outlaws unfair methods of competition, which includes cartels and monopolies, but also includes other things. And what's called the penumbra of the Federal Trade Commission Act. We're still defining what that is. And then you had the Clayton Act, which also is right around the time of the FTC Act, which applies. It again outlaws mergers that substantially lessen competition. Again, that was early 20th century. And then beyond that, you've had amendments to those laws in the 1950s and 60s. The penalties for Sherman Act violations were substantially increased. And then finally, the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act that we talked about, that was passed in the 1970s. And actually, it'd be interesting to see, this doctrine of law that was founded in the 1890s, the late 19th century, which, by the way, had antecedents back to English common law even prior to that. But this doctrine of law that's developed over the past 130 years now, is it a current debate we're having is it still fit for purpose to regulate markets today and to police markets, into the 21st century and frankly into the 22nd century? And that's kind of an ongoing debate that we're having today, both kind of with the cases that are brought and academically. But I'll tell you, it's a fascinating and frankly fun debate to be in.
Interesting. I appreciate the quick history lesson because it kind of tees up of why these things even exist to begin with. And then it sounds like it really stepped up during the Clayton Act, and that's around Roosevelt period. A
little bit later than that. But yeah, there was a perception, I think, but I think it was actually during the Wilson administration when the FTC Act came in, the Clayton Act came in. that the Sherman Act hadn't done enough to prevent kind of market concentration. And Kison, the debate that they had in the 1890s about, we need to, break up monopolies and monopolies, economic power turning to political power. It's not like we've solved that question in the 130 years since, right? I mean, we're still having those debates today. And what was Standard Oil? Standard Oil at the time, maybe some people see as some of the big tech companies today. I mean, that's a view held by some, and that's kind of. But the questions we had back in 1890, we're still basically asking the same questions today. Yes, we have had, and then don't get me wrong, we've had a voluminous amount of jurisprudence in that time to define kind of, how do we show a substantial lessening of competition? How do we define markets? We've had, both, and with antitrust, it's both law and economics. So we've had a substantial amount of jurisprudence, which has answered questions. We've had a substantial amount of economic analysis, which give us economic frameworks to kind of, again, see what competitive conditions are going to be when a merger happens. But the fundamental questions of, is this an effective way to police economic power impacting political power? The fundamental question still kind of remains today.
That's very true. What do we have? Great American Success or Monopoly?
I should mention also, it'd be remiss of me, I've been very U.S. in my comments. Again, antitrust law. It's in my career. So I've been doing this for over 25 years now. So really, this century, we now have about 120 countries around the world that enforce some form of antitrust law. So, and that has exploded recently. So, post World War II, you had in kind of the Marshall Plan and Reconstruction, you had Europe enacting its first competition laws. Antitrust moving to important economies like Japan, South Korea. And then you had, in the past, say, 20, 25 years, you've had South Africa, China, India, Brazil, just other just big, important developing economies all adopt antitrust or competition law. So while my comments, kind of the history, I gave you a U.S. history lesson, and really ever since then, it's when it's expanded globally to today, it's over 120 countries and territories. And that's why it's so important to a company like FedEx, because we operate globally and antitrust operates globally.
I want to get back to our deal example. So we just our form. You helped me nail the narrative down. We got it filled in. Now we're in this waiting period. Can we talk through what are the risks during the waiting period for, I guess, both sides of the table?
Sure. Well, I mean, let's talk about, so during this waiting period, let's just take our hypothetical deal. You're going to be you'll be having engagement with the agencies, and let's just say for fun, our deal is reportable in the United States, in Europe at the European Union level, China and Australia, just for fun. So you'll be talking to each of those agencies. Again, you'll want a consistent message. Let's say they're two U.S. companies with international operations. So as an in-house counsel, I'm going to want to have kind of my external counsel on the team, both in the United States. Also, it's key to have local counsel. In our example, in China, in Europe, and Australia, to help you with those agencies who have their own kind of their own analyses to do. You're going to want, so you'll be having your proactive. Actually, it's proactive and reactive with the agency. So you're going to want to submit stuff to the agencies. You'll probably have an economist on board as well to help kind of explain the economics of the deal. And then you're reactive because the agencies will send you, like the United States, they'll send you a second request, which is a huge kind of discovery request, if you will, requiring data and documents. You probably also want to get a third party document production group to help you with that. The agencies may want to talk with some of your executives in depositions or interviews, so you have to shepherd those through. So that's kind of there's the agency engagement part of this. The other risk you'll need to control for is gun jumping. So again, concurrent to this, you'll be conducting due diligence on the target. So you'll need to be careful. So that in the old days, I'm old enough to remember when due diligence, when you actually had the data room, you'd walk in and there'd be boxes of documents all over the place, and you couldn't photocopy the documents, or maybe you could, or you certainly couldn't take them outside the room. So nowadays it's all virtual. It's called a VDR, or virtual data room. So you're gonna set up, you'll have due diligence constructed through what's called the VDR, or virtual data room. But to avoid the gun jumping risks, you can't, let's say sensitive information, like let's say customer lists or prices or salaries. You probably don't want to have that fully available to everybody via the VDR. So you'll want to set up what's called a clean team, a subset of people who are working on the deal, who aren't involved in like the competitive aspects of where the companies compete, to review more sensitive documents like that, to again avoid the gun jumping risks of exchanging commercially sensitive information. Because let's not forget, the deal you can not get regulatory compliance and the deal falls apart, or there's you know better than I do, there's 1,000 reasons why the deal can fall apart and the merger collapses. Your financing collapses, valuation changes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or frankly, corporate exec doesn't like his or her role in the new company, and it falls apart because of that. Some personal reasons. I've seen it happen. And again, so you'll want to set up this kind of VDR to have this structured framework to control the information flows between the company to avoid gun jumping risks. And you also can't have company A, take premature control of company B. And that even starts in your merger and equity, your stock purchase agreement, or your asset purchase agreement, depending on the deal structure. So, for instance, there's something always called, I'm sure there's something called a material adverse effect, where if this happens, the deal falls apart. You don't want to set those thresholds too low, because you don't want to constrict company B's ordinary course of business. And where companies have gotten in trouble is, let's say, material adverse effect threshold is too low, or you're going to require company B to have company A's permission for ordinary course of business transactions prior to closing. Again, that's getting into the premature control aspect of gun jumping. Sure, you may want to say you don't want company B to sell off its huge factory, or the key asset you're acquiring. But when it comes to signing up customers or hiring and firing employees in the ordinary course of business, you need to be very careful about what you're taking control of. Yeah, there may be key employees that you'll want to have in the target post acquisition, but you don't want to get involved in the target's ordinary course of business decisions for the gun jumping risk. And finally, one thing I probably should have mentioned before, but I'll mention it now and probably correct myself, is in addition to, or as part of controlling the narrative in terms of why the deal is good for competition and why it doesn't raise competitive concerns, as in-house counsel and also external counsel, you are going to want to get on top of both the ordinary course of business documents of you and the acquired party, and the deal docs. What is your company saying about the deal? What are your bankers saying about the deal? What is the target saying about the deal? Because I mentioned earlier, in the United States, under the HSR form, you're going to need to turn over what's called the 4C documents related to you that show that have been presented to an officer or director of the company that talk about the deal's impacts on markets, competition, et cetera. And then in a second request, or in a phase 2 in Europe, you're going to need to turn over a lot of your ordinary course of business documents about places where you compete. So what are those documents saying about the deal, saying about competition? Is it consistent with your narrative? I mean, and you don't want it to be inconsistent, believe me. And some of the pitfalls I've seen in deals, both deals that I've worked on, not for FedEx, but deals I've worked on in the past, or ones I've read about, is let's say you're saying that this deal is not going to create a monopoly, but your bankers, let's say your third party bankers who are trying to sell the deal, are saying, oh, well, the target has a market position of, they have the capacity to increase prices, and wouldn't that be? And if you combine it with company A, you guys are gonna be a chance to leverage your market strength. So, banker documents about what they're saying about your deal, or the target. Let's say the target's a privately held company, and they're looking to kind of be bought out and kind of cash in. They may play up. Oh yeah, we have market power. Yeah. But you need to. I mean, and you really can't avoid that. But you need to know if those things exist. You don't. It's not fun. Let's say to be in a deposition or an investigation and see or either deal docs or ordinary course of business documents that you didn't know about that the agency brings to your attention. That's not a fun place to be.
So don't gun jump. Probably like a big fundamental there.
Yeah.
It sounds like things are pretty smooth if you don't get that second request.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, that's true. I mean, because second request or a phase 2 in Europe or the equivalents in, again, China, India, et cetera, you may have, you may need to answer questions within the first 30-day period or the first period. You may have document submissions. But if you could wrap it up before then, if you can avoid the phase 2 part of the merger review, that's great. And there's ways to do that. I mean, there's effective advocacy. Let's say company A and company B. Company A is on the West Coast primarily. Company B is on the East Coast primarily. Again, we're talking about a domestic deal. But let's say you have competition in, let's say, Kansas City. Well, that's a simple example. Maybe you come as part of the deal you present to the agencies. You say, look, we know there's an overlap here in Kansas City. We've already identified company C, which is another competitor, which is going to buy this part. It's going to take. It's called fix it first. We have a prearranged buyer, and as part of our transaction, we're going to divest this specific part of the deal to avoid the antitrust problems. And that may also be a way to get around an extended investigation, kind of a fix it. Identify the problem up front and fix it first. That's potentially another way to kind of short circuit an agency's investigation. But yeah, to your point, a second request is more often than not, it is very intrusive, it is very expensive, and it will lengthen the time period for again that pre-closing time period.
Yes, because you got to give them a lot of more information of sort of documentation and
data, docs, et cetera.
Everything that they're going to review and really be all up in your business.
Yeah, and then often the second request, the reason they're doing that is to build, is to build the evidence of the case they're working on, but also to prep themselves for likely the next stage, which would be depositions of your corporate executives based on the documents they see submitted via the second request.
When they see my Slack message that I sent to my colleague of we're going to kill this competitor, something along those lines, then that's going to be held against us.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Slack because the agencies recently put out kind of revised guidance that companies have an obligation to preserve potential evidence on platforms like Slack, like Teams, like these kind of the way people. So, I mean, we used to think back, 15 years ago, lawyers thought that email was going to be the death of legal privilege, and that's the going. Email is now tame. It's like, what are people saying on Slack, Teams? What are people saying on WhatsApp? I mean, that's kind of the next frontier, if you will, which the agencies clearly. It's not even the next frontier. It's here now. It's the way people communicate, and agencies know that, and they're going to want to see that stuff too.
Wait, would that be a best practice if I was going to go do a deal under review to tell my team, hey, don't put anything stupid in writing. If you had something to specifically talk about the nature of this deal, pick up the phone. I don't know. Is that like a fair thing? I know I'm not asking for legal advice on this, but
I wouldn't put it that way. The way I would counsel is just be careful the way you describe things. I would never probably say, pick up the phone instead of putting documentation. Obviously, major corporations, you need documentation, but the way I would counsel it is just be careful the way you characterize things. So, for instance, terms like market share or market power, those have meanings in antitrust. Again, meanings that have been developed via case law, via economic analysis, in the 100 and something years that the United States has been enforcing the antitrust laws. So, which the meaning of that may be different from kind of the business meaning of it. So, so let's, for instance, market shares. Oh, yeah, we have a great market share. Well, have you properly defined the relevant market in the way that antitrust has taught us to define the relevant market? So I would say, I would, and I think, and there have been some recent examples where the agencies actually, both in the merger context and outside the merger context, where the agencies have, the FTC or DOJ have said, oh, well, you received some careful coaching on what to say, or you were told to use the in-house corporate chat function and avoid email. I wouldn't go down that route. I would just be careful. Just be careful. Just be cognizant. Again, business people who I would advise that the business terms that you use may have different meanings in antitrust, and your documents will be seen. I mean, you may think things are seen in context. An agency reviewer will be reviewing page by page by page, and something that could stand out in an email, which is part of a broader conversation, they're going to say, look at that, and say, and it's the general thing of, don't put something in writing that you wouldn't want to see on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I mean, it's, for instance.
Is there a way to tell in advance of a deal if you're going to get reviewed, or are you just going blind into this process?
No, you're not. You're very rarely going blind. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Kison. Are there substantive concerns? So horizontal overlaps. Are there vertical issues, like vertical foreclosure issues? And a lot of it's going to depend, as we were just talking about, on what do your ordinary course of business documents say? What do your deal documents say? Because that's the deal documents are the first thing the agencies are going to look at. And if they're saying that, the combination of company A and company B are going to, create a company with a large market share, or let's say you're going down from 3 competitors in a market to 2 competitors, or 4 competitors to 3 competitors, those kind of very high level views of market concentration are a huge flag of, yes, this deal likely will raise concern. So you're rarely going at it blind. I mean, of course, you're rarely going at it completely blind. Also, you rarely have perfect information right up front. I mean, it's something that as you go further in the deal, you find, you dig into the ordinary course of business documents, you may find evidence, both good and bad, that are supporting that either support your theory about why the deal won't harm competition, or may not support it. But you'll want to find out about that, and not have it brought to your attention by the agencies. So yeah, but largely with the kind of the analysis we talked about in terms of kind of horizontal overlaps or vertical issues, you'll have a sense of kind of what the agencies will be interested in. And don't forget, especially in the United States, so many of the antitrust lawyers, so I've had my agency experience in Jersey, and then went to the private sector. There are people who go to the private sector and then go to the agencies, and back. Call it the United States, they call it the revolving door. So you largely know the questions they'll be asking. And actually, the FTC and DOJ, on their substantive analysis, they have issued merger guidelines, which kind of, and they've just been updated about a year ago, which goes through the questions the agencies ask. So I mean, the framework is fairly transparent. So you should be able to know. Again, you won't be going in blind. You should have kind of a sense of where the issues are, how much risk is there. Recognizing, however, that you will not have perfect information, especially early on in the process.
All right, let's say we go through this and then the deal ultimately gets rejected. What happens now? Can we appeal this?
Well, that depends where you are. So in the U.S., again, the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice, they cannot stop a deal under Hart-Scott, under the HSR Act. They cannot stop a deal under the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act. If the FTC or DOJ wants to actually stop a deal, what they formally need to do is seek an injunction in federal district court to actually enjoin the deal. And how it generally works is they will file for a preliminary injunction, which the court will grant or not. Now, often it's just a preliminary injunction. And there's a legal test of probability of likelihood and the merits about whether the court will likely find in favor that the deal is anti-competitive. But if the agencies get a preliminary injunction, often in the United States, that has the effect of killing a deal, because it will often then push the deal beyond kind of the target closing date. Your financing for the deal often will kind of dry up. And so preliminary injunction in the US will often have the effect of killing a deal. But in the United States, you can advise a client to say to prohibit the merger, the FTC or the DOJ, the reviewing agency, will need to take you to court. You will have your day in court. Now, obviously, you can short circuit that. Let's say I mentioned how earlier you got the fix it first remedy. I mean, if through the investigation the agency say, hey, we're going to take you to court unless you agree to divest the assets in this geographic market. And okay, you know what? We'll do that. And you enter into what's called a consent decree, which is filed in court, but it's no longer an adversarial process. It's basically a settlement. So in the U.S., to ultimately block a deal, the FTC or the DOJ will need to take you to court and get a preliminary injunction. I should also mention, by the way, the United States, in addition to the FTC and DOJ, state attorneys general and private plaintiffs, including class action plaintiffs, can also sue under Section 7 to stop a deal. Now, they don't have any pre-merger obligations. There's no pre-merger obligations with respect to state AGs or private plaintiffs, but they also potentially get out there to try to seek an injunction to try to stop the deal. So that's in the United States. When you get to places like Europe, it's a totally different. And Europe, don't forget the DG Competition, which is the European competition law enforcer, and the European Union's legal system, that's based on a civil law system as compared to a common law system in the United States. So under their civil law approach in Europe, DG Comp, the European competition enforcer itself, along with some of the national enforcers like the Bundeskartellamt in Germany, the French Competition Agency, others, they can say that this deal violates European competition law and it is prohibited. Final. And the deal cannot close. Now, the parties can seek judicial review on that, but absent extraordinary circumstances, the deal is basically dead. I mean, so for instance, actually, this is before my time joining FedEx. There was a company in Europe called TNT, which was a Dutch express courier. UPS, actually, this is all public information. I mean, UPS tried to acquire them back in 2015. I believe the date was 14-15. That deal was rejected by DG Comp, which killed that deal. The deal died. FedEx came in. FedEx then acquired, filed at DG Comp, got clearance at DG Comp, and then ultimately acquired TNT in 2016. Concurrently, UPS appealed the initial rejection decision. They actually won in the European Courts of Justice. The European Courts called the ECJ found that that the DG Comp didn't follow procedurally all the requirements that they had to during the merger investigation. But it's in a way, it's somewhat of a Pyrrhic victory by that point, because the UPS deal had already died because the agency said no, and FedEx came in to acquire it. So they ultimately won in court, but it's arguably somewhat of a Pyrrhic victory. So again, wow. So in the U.S. you'll have your day in court. In Europe, the administrative agency decides, subject to judicial review, and then there's variances of that in other jurisdictions, India, Australia, Brazil, etc.
They've been getting a lot more aggressive lately. Why?
Oh yeah. No, I'd say it's particularly in the United States under the Biden administration. There's been much more second requests for agency. I mentioned how the early terminations under HSR were suspended for a bit. They kind of blame that on COVID, but I think it's kind of relaxed, but not totally relaxed. But they've been issuing a lot more second requests in the U.S. And looking abroad again, Europe, Canada, India, South Africa, China, just very Brazil. I would say very, very aggressive regulators, but I wouldn't say aggressive in a bad way. They are just doing their statutory jobs to protect markets and competition in their jurisdiction, and they do a very good job at it. And then they're drive full engagement with the merging parties.
You think they're in cahoots?
Well, look, I mean, there's agencies.
Notes and
Well, yeah, no, agencies will. And there's been some criticism recently. There was a deal, I think, Illumina Grail, that I was not involved in, where there was, I think, some criticism of how much information that the European Union and FTC were exchanging. I don't really know the details of that, but look, as I said before, the agencies, when they're reviewing a common deal, agencies cooperate even beyond M&A in terms of cartel enforcement, and that's largely a positive thing in terms of busting up international cartels. So you will need to assume in an international deal that where you file, the agencies will be talking. They may not be able to exchange information, but they at least will be talking. And again, that's why that consistency of message across agencies is very, very important.
Gun jumping. Have you seen companies actually get in trouble for gun jumping?
Oh, sure. I mean, well, I will knock on wood, not for a client that I've represented, thankfully, to date. But no, just in 2024, I did a quick look recently. So there's been gun jumping fines or investigations in China, India, Mexico, and Spain. The United States, both the FTC and DOJ have been very active in this space. And actually, what I mentioned, the Illumina Grail case in July 2023, they received a 430 million euro fine for gun jumping, which I believe is one of the highest ever for closing their deal prior to getting clearance by DG Comp. That's currently under appeal at the European courts. So yeah, very, very clear recent examples. And actually, Kison, it's my own example. I mentioned I was in Jersey. We brought a few gun jumping cases when I was at the JCRA as executive director. For instance, we actually fined Lufthansa. I forgot what the amount was, but we fined Lufthansa a few £1,000s for closing their acquisition of an airline called CityJet, which was one of the airlines serving Jersey. They were legally required to file that in Jersey. They didn't, so we fined them for gun jumping. So I've had some personal experience of that as a regulator, but thankfully not on the defendant side.
How do you balance it with like integration planning? Because I do a bunch of these podcasts, big advocates of planning integration early so you can have success post close. But then you throw in all this gun jumping stuff in there, then it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't be requesting so much information and plan integration. How do you strike the balance?
It's very, very hard. And I'll even throw another complicating thing into the good example you've raised in terms of integration planning. But what if you also have, even prior to the acquisition, you already do business with the acquired party. You have kind of ordinary course of business dealings with the acquired party. So it can get massively complex in that, okay, your ordinary course of business with the acquired party, you'll want to keep that separate from the potential deal, but that can get complicated. So let's say it's a long-term supply relationship, which is coming up to renew. Let's say they're a supplier and that's coming up to renew that long-term supply relationship. Do you go forward with that in light of the deal? What if the deal falls apart? I mean, so that can get complicated. And also that in terms of premature control, that kind of stuff, if you're already dealing with the company at kind of a commercial level, that can get complex. So on a high level, I'd like to, if you already have those pre-existing commercial relationship with the acquired company, I'd like to keep that separate. And there's an expression, within companies of bringing people under the tent or tenting. Like I don't want people on the commercial side to be tented if we're already doing business with the target. So you got that complication, but also integration. I mean, the kind of the black letter law, if you will, is you can plan for integration, but you can't implement those plans. But I mean, you just need to be very, very careful. I mean, you can do detailed planning. You can't get into some of the information you may want to see, or you may want to make sure, let's say salaries, you may want to put that, you'll want to put that in a clean room, not have that available for everybody. So only a subsection of people get to see that information in terms of integration planning. But there's only so much you can do pre-closing. So for instance, and this goes beyond antitrust. So back to the question of, are they participating in a cartel? So typically in due diligence, you'll ask the target, are you involved in any government investigations in terms of antitrust or otherwise, anti-corruption, privacy? You know, what decisions have you had in the past, let's say 5 years? Have you received any subpoenas, any notices of violations, et cetera, any allegations that you're acting anti-competitively? You generally ask for those kind of things in due diligence. But like a thing you would like to do, for instance, is do a forensic email search of the acquired parties' sales teams to see, you know, what kind of emails are they sending out about the competition. You clearly cannot do that during due diligence. But that's some things that, let's say, with integration, once you close, you may want to do that as part of, if you will, post-closing due diligence to see, to really look under the hood. And actually, the DOJ has just announced pretty recently that they're going to give companies a 6-month window post-acquisition for not just antitrust, for like FCPA as well, where if you find evidence of illegal conduct post-acquisition, within 6 months, you can come into the agencies and kind of, you know, give full disclosure, cooperate, and you can avoid or reduce fines in those scenarios. But you're right; it is a very much a balancing act. In my experience, Kison, that as you get close, there's certain stages. Like, let's say, as you get closer to your closing date, you know, let's say you filed HSR, you filed in Europe, and you get clearance in both Europe and the United States. So, you know, there's the Europe, they close the investigation. The United States, the agencies let the waiting periods run out. The gun jumping concerns don't go away after the agencies, after you receive clearance. They're still there, but kind of the focus on it isn't as acute. And as you get closer and closer to closing, because look, at the end of the day, you know, day one, there are very practical considerations, like will employees' ID badges still let you in the building? Like, will people get paid on day one at the target company? Will their health insurance still work? I mean, there's practical things like that once you get agency clearance and as you get closer to closing, the gun jumping risk is still there, but it's kind of a sliding scale, and it's a sliding. Okay, there's legal risks, but you also want to make sure people get paid on day one and their health insurance still works. So it's kind of a sliding scale. And once you get closer to closing, you can take more. Yes, you're still in the planning, but now, and there's been, I've been involved, let's say, for instance, will the IT service still work? So, you know, you may want to have the IT people, okay, they're going to do what's called a sandbox. Like, okay, combined their platform and our platform, and in a kind of a hypothetical kind of test environment, does it still work? You know, and you can do that prior to closing, but not combine the IT systems. That's stuff you can do kind of as you get closer. But yeah, it's something that you need to be on top of it as antitrust lawyers.
Dancing the fine line.
Exactly.
What is the best way to prepare for regulatory compliance?
Just, again, like anything, you got to know the facts. You got to know your clients and what they do. You got to be all over the business documents. And I think key is early engagement. I mean, you can't, is just being there. And I will say with FedEx, I mean, we have a world-class legal team. I mean, I support, in my role as antitrust lawyer, I support both our specific kind of M&A lawyers, and our corporate development teams. And I'm often brought in kind of very early on deals, both from kind of an antitrust perspective and a compliance perspective. And I find that useful, again, to help get the detailed knowledge of the facts beforehand, and again, to help construct that narrative about where you need to file, why you need to, and why this deal is beneficial for the companies, beneficial for competition. So I think just that early engagement is key. And frankly, I would say that early engagement, because a lot we're talking about here kind of goes broader into compliance. Like, M&A compliance is only one subsegment of corporate compliance, corporate legal compliance. And I'd say having that kind of business engagement, being a business partner, and knowing the details of your business and having that engagement upfront, early, and ongoing, I think is key to the entire thing.
Great way to summarize this. I got to ask you the most important question. What's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
Oh, well, look, and this is it goes back to what we've been talking about. And it also goes beyond kind of M&A, just antitrust. Antitrust can be complicated, like, defining relevant markets, thinking what is the cross elasticity of demand between products that, between company A's products, company B's products. These can be very, very, very complex and require economists and et cetera. But when things get really simple is, let's say you have like a corporate document which has gone to the board of directors saying, hey, if company A and company B merge, they're going to have a monopoly, or they'll be able to increase prices by 10%. And it's like you can have these complex economic arguments. You can hire the best economists in the world, but if your documents are going to sink you, that's going to be on page 1 of the complaint, and you don't want to be there. So there have been well published cases of mergers where just the documents were horrible. Either the ordinary course of business documents or the deal documents were horrible, and they sank the most sophisticated economic or legal arguments you could. If a document says it's, the merger will harm customers, that's a very, very steep hole to dig out of, and often you can't. So it doesn't matter kind of what the most brilliant lawyers and economists you hire. If the documents if your own documents are going to sink your deal or contradict what you're saying, that's not a fun day.
Yeah, don't forget the fundamentals.
Exactly.
Charles, this has been a great conversation.
Well, thank you. It's been fun. No, and it's like, as I said, I've been checking out your stuff on LinkedIn. You guys, I really have you take a whole approach to mergers. It's a great subject. So you look like you guys, M&A Science does just fantastic work there. So I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to what you guys do. But it's obviously to give the exposure you guys do to the entire M&A spectrum, not just the antitrust part, but giving kind of the antitrust part of that has been an absolute honor and privilege to me. So no, thank you for this interview, and thank you for the great work that M&A Science does.
The privilege is all mine, or the pleasure is all mine. You've contributed a lot to our rising community of M&A scientists. You've today helped me become a better M&A scientist. And those of you still listening, thank you. You are also a fellow M&A scientist. Love to hear from you. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Any ideas, topics, suggestions, feedback, open to it. Till next time, here's to the deal.